You are listening to Reforming the Ozarks, a podcast serving the local church in Southwest Missouri with biblical teaching and Reformed theology. To learn more about our churches, visit ctkjoplin.com and gospelsgf.org.
Hey, welcome to the first episode of Reforming the Ozarks. This is a brand new podcast that we're starting because we want to see churches growing and more churches growing and being planted right here in Southwest Missouri. And we want to equip our people with solid biblical teaching and reformed theology so that we can be reforming the Ozarks. So that's what we want to and what we hope to be doing with this podcast. I'm Levi Bakerink, and I'm the pastor of Christ the King Presbyterian Church right here in Joplin, Missouri. And I have Dustin Ray with me as well. Dustin, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's a good Wednesday morning here in Springfield. And I'm Dustin Ray. I'm the pastor of Gospel Fellowship, PCA, in Springfield. We're a very young church plant here in Springfield, Missouri. Actually being planted by Christ the King in Joplin.
Yeah, exactly. We're really excited about the work that you're doing out there in Springfield, and we're blessed to be a part of that with our presbytery, working to help you do the work out there. So we're going to be talking about all of that stuff, talking about our churches, talking about what we want to do for this podcast. But what we wanted to start with in today's episode is talking about how we got here and where we're going. So, Dustin, did you want to start? Do you want me to start? I hit the mic. I shouldn't do that.
No, you're fine. So I'll go ahead and start.
Okay.
I changed the order around. I misread our script here, and so, but I get the privilege of starting us. So, yeah. Right. So one of the things we want to talk about, as Levi said, was how did each of us get to our churches, our confessionally reformed and Presbyterian churches, and so. So I had the privilege of growing up here in Southwest Missouri all my life. I've lived here all but basically 4 years of my life, and so I grew up just south of Springfield in Nixa, and then went to I graduated from Rogersville High School in 2005. Did some ministry around our areas. I'll say more about that in upcoming episodes. But went to Evangel University, graduated there in 2011, went up to Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, where I did a Master of Arts in Old Testament and a Master of Arts in Biblical Languages. And then we moved back here to Springfield in 2015. And I knew that the Lord called me to ministry, and I didn't know exactly how that was going to play out. At that time, I had worshipped in an ARP church. I had worshipped, my wife and I had worshipped in an ARP church. We had worshipped at an OPC church, a PCA church, and we had become reformed, growing in our understandings for sure. But when we moved back to Springfield, at the time, there were no PCA churches in Springfield. And so the closest denomination that we were aware of here in Springfield to where we were theologically was ECO, a covenant order of evangelical Presbyterians. And so I came under care there in Springfield at First and Calvary Presbyterian Church. And so did ministry in ECO for about 6 to 7 years here in Southwest Missouri. My first call was at First Presbyterian Church in Monette, Missouri. I served there for about 2.5 years, and it was a wonderful experience. Learned to preach there and learned to lead there. Learned lots of things the easy way, lots of things the hard way. And then I came on there in September of 2017, left there April of 2020. And I don't know if you know much about what was going on in the world in 2020, but there were a lot of changes going on.
Not too much happening. Sure.
Right. Right. But yeah, 1 month to COVID, we had moved to First Presbyterian Church in Branson, Missouri, another eco church, and I came on there as assistant pastor, and then as associate pastor, and served there until April of 2023. Um, the last year or so of my time there at First Presbyterian and in eco, I just realized that it was time for me to move into the PCA. I was understanding what confessionalism is, and just my better fit in the PCA, and so began working with Hills and Plains Presbytery to transfer my ordination from ECO to the PCA, and begin the work of planting Gospel Fellowship. So it's been we've been doing that ever since October of 2022. So we've been at it almost a couple of years, in small forms, in 2022, and growing in last year in 23, and this year. So anyway, where we are right now with Gospel Fellowship, we have been building a core group for the last 6 months, year, slowly. And then we've been meeting as a core group weekly, sometimes twice weekly, for building our core group. And then we've begun a Bible study in our home this summer. And we're really excited that it looks like we're praying toward beginning Sunday worship next month in September of 2024. So we're finalizing details there. Really excited about what the Lord has for us. Excited about the partnership that we have with a local church. More on that in coming episodes, but yeah. So that's kind of how we got to where we're at with Gospel Fellowship, and we'll be saying a lot more. But Levi, tell us how you got to where you're at in the PCA and with Christ the King in Joplin.
Yeah, our stories overlap quite a bit in a lot of cool ways, and we ended up here in Joplin in October of 2022, and really that's when we we reconnected, and we started working together right about the same time, which is really cool.
Yeah, it is.
But I grew up in the Dutch Reformed Church, it's the Reformed Church in America, which is the old mainline Dutch Reformed Church here in the States. And I grew up in Pella, Iowa, small Dutch town. It's a small town east of Des Moines. Tons of Reformed churches out there. And I grew up in that kind of context, in a Reformed environment. Even though my home church growing up really didn't emphasize its Reformed heritage all that much. And in fact, the church now, it's not part of the RCA anymore. And the RCA has abandoned a lot of the historic Reformed theological distinctives, biblical distinctives, even. And that's a story for another time. But point being, I grew up in this world. And really my story about getting into the PCA and becoming more confessional, more Reformed, is really a story of rediscovering and embracing those roots that I grew up in. So I was in high school when we moved south to Springfield, Missouri. My folks still live in Springfield, and Southwest Missouri really feels like my home. And that's why I'm excited to be doing this podcast and talking about our churches here, and hoping to equip our churches in this area. But when we moved, we were looking for churches, of course, and we didn't really find anything that we were really looking for. We went to some small coffee shop churches. We went to the big Assemblies of God mega churches. We ended up going to a Christian church in Springfield. And great people there, wonderful people, but there were some theological differences, some philosophy of ministry differences that we didn't quite agree with. And I think those are some of the things we hope to discuss as we go through this podcast and talk about all kinds of different topics.
Definitely.
But at the same time, so here in high school, and I'm also going to Evangel University in Springfield, which is where I first met you, and you were my Hebrew teacher, as you're a few years older than me, and working with Dr. Griffin and Dr. Nunnally there. So I got to meet you then, um, and yeah, and we went to Gordon Conwell as well. I went to Gordon Conwell as well after Evangel, but Evangel was my first experience with the Assemblies of God and with Pentecostalism, Pentecostal theology. I went to Evangel almost by accident. I knew I wanted to go to a Bible school. But I didn't know much of anything. I just wanted to study the Bible more. So Evangel was there in town. Um, they gave me a little trombone scholarship to go play for their band. So I thought, why not? Let's do it. Um, and I think it's fair to say that my freshman year at Evangel, I really I went all in on the seeking after the Pentecostal kind of theology. I went to the churches with my friends. I went to the prayer meetings on Wednesday nights. I prayed to the Spirit, to give me the gift of tongues. That was a big deal. I was asked that from students and taught that from professors. I was being told in chapel that we needed to do this. I was quenching the Spirit. Well, I don't want to quench the Spirit. Nobody wants to do that. I want everything that God wants me to have, and I was praying for that, but nothing ever happened from that. But those experiences really brought me back to my roots and started me thinking, what is it that I believe?
Yeah.
What was I taught growing up? Um, I was raised on the Heidelberg Catechism, so I started reading through that again. I read R.C. Sproul's book, What is Reformed Theology? And I can't remember how I found that book, but I'm pretty sure it was literally, I just Googled what is Reformed Theology.
Oh.
So, A+ marketing and
Yeah, right.
working on that book, so I'd become, I'd been brought back to my Reformed roots at that time. I went to Gordon Conwell, again, a few years behind you there, and another story for another time, but I was pretty settled in Reformed theology, but what I needed to learn was kind of what you were talking about earlier, is the confession and what it means to be confessional, and especially around the doctrine of the church. I needed to learn that Reformed theology was so much more than just 5 points or 5 particular items of doctrine regarding salvation.
Yeah.
And again, something that we want to be talking about on this podcast. So I was part of the Acts 29 network. I was part of a church plant in Boston for about 5 years. Really enjoyed my time there, but I began to just, again, feel like something was missing, that we needed a commitment to the historic creeds of the church, and we needed to be grounded in a kind of confession, and especially in how churches are to be structured, and how are we just one individual church, or are we part of the larger church body? Those are all the kinds of things I was wrestling with. So to wrap all this up, that's eventually what led me into the PCA, Presbyterian Church in America. I wanted to be part of a church that had those confessional and Reformed roots, a church that was Presbyterian in its church government. And again, we're going to talk more about what that means. And also that had an emphasis on church planting. I'd really come to see the need for that and appreciate that. And the PCA was doing that kind of work. So I joined the PCA back in 2019 as a member, and that was still in the Boston area. But then after that, I did an internship and was ordained at All Saints Reformed Presbyterian Church in Richmond, Virginia. I moved there in June of 2020. So yeah, again, nothing going on that summer in the world or in the country, around the country. But it was an awesome time, wonderful time there. Was ordained in that church, and then I took the call to be the pastor of Christ the King here in Joplin in the fall of 2022. So we're coming up on 2 years, and yeah, been married since 2022 as well. And we have a 5-month-old boy now as well. So it's a busy season of life, but a good season of life. And we're really excited about the work that our churches are doing, and excited to be talking more about that with all of you. So that's a bit of my story. That's who we are. So, Dustin, why don't you tell us a bit more about what our prayers are for our churches and for this region in Southwest Missouri?
Yeah, man, I'm really excited. And as you're describing, before I get into that, as you're describing just the similarities and backgrounds that we both have and our experiences coming into ministry and college at Assemblies of God schools and that
Mm-hmm.
sort of thing. I think we will have a lot of overlap, and we'll share funny stories. We'll share experiences and that sort of thing. But really, that really tees up kind of the purpose of what we're doing here in our prayer for our churches, our
Yeah.
prayer for our region here in Southwest Missouri, and our prayer for the podcast. Um, you know, the world headquarters of the Assemblies of God is in Springfield, Missouri, and we're so thankful for our time. I know I'm thankful, and
Mm-hmm.
I know you are as well. I'm so
Oh yeah.
thankful. We're thankful for our time in the assemblies. So many of its pastors and churches love the Lord, preach the gospel, and are doing good work. But there are differences between between Reformed theology and Wesleyan theology, or Pentecostal theology,
Mm-hmm.
that that we believe is not just Reformed and so it's good or better, but it's biblical. It's faithful to Scripture. And so that's part of what we want to be talking about and praying for and working toward in our podcast is in our churches, that we would be, as the PCA says, faithful to Scripture, true to the Reformed faith, and obedient to the Great Commission.
Yes.
So super excited about that. But our prayer for our churches and our prayer for our region, among the many things that we're praying for, is that many, many more churches would be planted, revitalized, rejuvenated with the preaching of the gospel, with the
Mm-hmm.
faithful preaching of the scriptures, and living out faithful biblical living. Um, uh, and we hope, in particular, like as Levi exactly said, and what we're doing here in Springfield, that lots of PCA churches will be planted in Southwest Missouri.
Yeah.
Levi has a wonderful vision for that. We're going to be talking more about that. Crazy ideas, crazy hopes and prayers that we have together for lots of churches, lots of PCA churches planted in Southwest Missouri, um,
Mm-hmm.
uh, so that not only people that we know, people in our age groups, but our children. Levi mentioned, his son. My wife and I have 3 children of our own. That our children would come to know and love Jesus. That their children, our grandchildren, our
Mm-hmm.
great grandchildren, for 1,000 generations would know and love Jesus. So that's part of our prayer for the podcast. That what we're doing will support that mission, that vision, in spreading the gospel and gospel preaching churches in Southwest Missouri.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And
go ahead.
oh, just jumping off of that, and then I can talk a bit about what to look forward to on the show. But I just totally agree, and uh, that's why we want to do this, because it's not because we have it all figured out, and we were
Right.
talking a bit about this before we recorded. It's not because the PCA is a perfect church. It's not because it's uh, the only way you can do it. But we do see the value and the benefit, and we've seen it in our personal lives, and we've seen it in the churches around here, that make too much of an emphasis on whatever it might be. It might be on the production or the show that comes around, that comes along with these kinds of churches, and we want to talk about that on the show. What's biblical worship? What's worship that is done in accordance with God's word? We're going to talk about that. Seeing so many messages, instead of preaching the gospel of free grace, they're messages that are very legalistic, that are very are wanting to lay heavy burdens on our people, instead of pointing them to their Savior, he's declared it is finished, as he was dying on the cross, and we want our people to be free in the gospel, free from the guilt and shame, free from the sting of death and the power of the law over them. So those are some of, just reiterating these are our prayers, our concerns. These are why we want to be doing this, because we've seen that need, and we need more churches, and we're not the only churches doing this in the area by any means, but we want to see more churches that are committed to preaching the Bible, preaching the gospel, teaching the whole counsel of God, administering the sacraments rightly, being the church, being who the church has been called to be. So that's our plan for the podcast, really, is that we just be talking about all these different things. So I think the plan right now is this episode was just a kind of an introduction of who we are and what we're wanting to do. We have another episode planned right now that is going to really be all about our churches. There's a lot of exciting things going on in Gospel Fellowship and also here at Christ the King. Obviously, y'all are getting ready to plant, or you haven't planting, you're getting ready to start worship next month, and we want to use this podcast as a way to keep people up to date as well, and especially to let the people in Springfield know what's happening in Joplin, the people in Joplin be knowing what's going on in Springfield, because we are part of we're part of the same church. We really do belong to one another. So that's what we're going to do next episode, talk about some of our churches, and I'll share a bit of the background and history of Christ the King in Joplin and kind of where we're going as well. But then after that, we want to talk about all kinds of different topics about biblical theology, about Reformed theology. And we mentioned used a lot of phrases and words in here that maybe you're not familiar with. And there's not a lot of Reformed teaching out here. So what even is Reformed theology? We want to talk about that. We want to talk about the 5 points of Calvinism, those dreaded evil points that people talk about. What are those 5 points actually? What do they mean? What do they not mean? Talk about the Reformation and why the Reformation was so important. We want to get into worship. Why is worship important? What does Reformed worship look like? How is that different? And what can you expect when you come to one of our churches? Why does it look different? Why do we have a distinct kind of liturgy? Why do we even use that word that is so foreign to a lot of churches today? So those are some of the kinds of topics that we hope to talk about, and there's no shortage of them. So we want to talk about as much as we can, so that hopefully you'll be served by our discussions and be better equipped to know, if you're a member of one of our churches already, why we do what we do, and then maybe if you're not a member, you would consider coming to one of our services. You'd consider learning more about who we are and what we believe and what we're all about. We would love, that would be a wonderful thing to happen through this podcast. We would love to be fostering those kinds of conversations. So that's our plan. Dustin and I, leave off anything?
Well, no, I don't think you left anything out. I think what's really cool is, the reach, the geographic reach that Joplin has and Springfield has, really, gets a pretty a broad distance of geographic nearness. I don't know of a much better way to say that, but with Joplin, and Joplin's is a big area, Springfield's a big area, and our regions our two regions cover a lot of space. It's kind of what I'm trying to say. which is
Yeah.
really exciting. You within a 30-minute drive, we of our two areas, you've got two PCA churches, that are near you. That's really exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And then with that, there because there are no other PCA churches in our area, and there are other faithful Reformed
Mm-hmm.
churches, in our
Yep.
areas. Um,
Absolutely.
we could mention, Heritage ARP in Springfield, Missouri, a
Mm-hmm.
faithful church, other churches as well. Uh, but there's something different about accessing theology from your local church and your local church pastor,
Yeah.
that's different from just accessing wonderful teaching on YouTube, right? And
Mm-hmm.
this is on
Mm-hmm.
YouTube. We're there. That's good and great. And you know, Levi, I know you and I have burned hundreds of hours on YouTube. Watching R.C. Sproul and Ligonier and a million other wonderful, faithful teachings on that. But by God's grace, now in Southwest Missouri, we have teaching from these two churches, Gospel Fellowship and Christ the King, where you can go to our churches, come and talk to me, come and talk to Levi and the other elders at Christ the King, who are our elders as well. And we'll talk more about,
Mm-hmm.
church polity, which is exciting. It really is.
Yeah.
It's meaningful
Yeah.
and good. But you can come and talk to these elders near you, viewer, listener, and get explanation for your specific questions that you can't do on YouTube. You can send an email, you can drop a comment, like, comment, subscribe. You can do that, but that's not from your local shepherds, and that's really important.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's another great point too, is we're doing this podcast not because we want this to be an end in and of itself, but so that it would serve the local church. And
Yes.
you're exactly right. This is so that people would be pointed back to the local church, so that the local church could thrive, because that's what people need.
Yeah.
It's
That's
way too
exactly
easy
right.
for us to get isolated and just be
Right.
online and not be worshiping and being part of a fellowship of believers, and that's really what we want to see. That's one of our aims and our prayers for this podcast is we'd be able to help facilitate that kind of in-person connection in the local church.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what we have coming up. But we would love to hear from you if you have any ideas or topics that you'd like us to discuss. We're pretty fancy here, so we've already set up a Gmail account that you can reach us at. You can email us at reformingtheozarks@gmail.com. And Dustin, how can people get connected to you if they want to reach out to you and learn more about your work in Springfield? How can they get connected?
Yeah, so you can find us, our website, gospelsgf.org, and you can email me at dustin@gospelsgf.org. We are, like I said earlier, we're aiming at, praying toward, and working toward beginning Sunday worship next month, September. We're super excited about that. But yeah, you can find us again at gospelsgf.org. Levi, how can folks find out about you and Christ the King?
Yeah, if you're in the Joplin area, we'd love to meet with you and have you come visit us. Our website is ctkjoplin.com. You can reach me, Levi, at ctkjoplin.com. We're right here on Main and 20th, right in the smack dab in the middle of Joplin. So we'd love to hear from you and meet with you, talk with you, and pray with you. So we're so thankful that we get to serve Southwest Missouri and be here, and we're really excited about what God is going to do through His churches and through His church in the weeks and months and years to come. So I think that about wraps up our first episode. Dustin, do you have anything to tell the good people before we log off?
Man, the most important thing is Romans 5:8. God shows his love for us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. That is the heart of the gospel. And that is the heart of our churches. That's the heart of our message. And that's what we're going to be sharing with Reforming the Ozarks.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks for that, Dustin. And thank you all for tuning into this first episode. Let us know what you think, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Reforming the Ozarks. We would love to hear from you. You can reach us at reformingtheozarks@gmail.com. To learn more about our churches, visit ctkjoplin.com and gospelsgf.org. If you would like to partner with us in planting confessional and reformed churches right here in the Ozarks, go to gospelsgf.org and click on Make a Donation.